So now we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit about the treatment we're trying to use in this study. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT actually, or cognitive behavior therapy, is sort of a fancy way of saying something that I think it's a pretty natural way that many of us use to try to help ourselves when difficult things happen in our life. It really capitalizes on two, what I consider to be really natural ways to help yourself feel better. One is to think about things more clearly, to kind of get your perspective in your mind, and the other is to live a little differently. So cognitive, that relates to what you're thinking about, and the behavioral part relates to how you live. And I suspect that many of you might have used these tools today. You just probably didn't know it. So let's imagine we're trying to, our clients, our participants are coming to us hoping to feel differently. In this case, they're feeling sad and they want to feel happier. That's pretty much. They want to get interested in things again. That's what they're trying to change. This sort of sad mood, they're trying to change it to a different way of feeling. I think we could do a little experiment together and see what you choose to try to help yourself feel differently. I'm going to pick a feeling that you probably don't have right now. So this feeling is, let's try to imagine that we're going to ask everyone here to try to make themselves feel guilty. Let's just imagine there's a meter that's connected to you and it can detect whether you're feeling guilty or not. And maybe there's a big prize for somebody who feels really guilty really quickly. And we'd all like to win the prize. So let's imagine right now our job is to change how we're feeling now to feeling guilty. I picked guilty because I thought most of you, since you're here working hard, you wouldn't feel it. You wouldn't be feeling guilty right now. So let's imagine. Let's just imagine ourselves feeling guilty right now. Begin. Try to make yourself feel guilty. Well, I'm not sure if you succeeded or not, but it wasn't hard for me. Mostly all I have to do is think about all the emails and phone calls that I haven't returned, and it makes me feel guilty almost instantly. I was successful in changing how I was feeling before to feeling a little guilty. I wonder if you were successful. If you were, how'd you do it? Well, let's talk a little bit about how I did it. I use what I think is a tried and true method for how you might change how you feel, and that is to try to think about things differently. So I was thinking about making this videotape, thinking about what might be useful to you, and then suddenly I thought about all the calls and emails I need to return. And that approach, changing what you think about, you probably use that too. Maybe you thought about something you regretted or something you haven't done. That's a method that kind of comes natural to us. I didn't just wait for myself to feel guilty and just kind of bear down and try to do it. I had to think about something. But let's say you were having trouble thinking about something that kind of would lead you to feel guilty. Maybe you've lived a really careful and excellent life, and you have no regrets and no things that you're behind on. So, or maybe you were just having trouble thinking this day, but you really wanted to win this prize. Another route is to do what? Another way to change how you feel from what you were feeling before to feeling guilty now is to do something. So maybe you could reach over into your neighbor's purse and take out their wallet. Or maybe you could insult someone across the table. You could change how you live in this moment, and maybe you'd start to feel guilty, and you could succeed in our goal. So we've really identified two natural ways to change how you feel. Thinking change and changing how you live, or what you do. I suspect you've used these not just here in this little thought experiment, but in your life. Maybe someone criticizes you, then you feel really sad about it. But then you get to thinking, well, he said that I was not a very nice person. But then you start thinking of all the reasons why you might be a pretty nice person. The things you've done that were kind to others or the people you supported. You begin to change your way of thinking. And then maybe if somebody were to say that to you, you'd feel kind of down. And maybe that would be the night you'd go for a walk or go out to have something to eat or try to do something fun, not just sit there and dwell on it. I think most of us have had that kind of experience where something happens, you get a little negative feedback, or perhaps something, goes wrong with the car and you start to feel really demoralized, well, you think to yourself, it's not true that the car always breaks down. It's not really true that everything is terrible in my life. There are some reasons why some things are pretty good. And usually if we start to feel low, we try to change how we live, do things for satisfaction, do things for enjoyment, reach out to people. Those are natural ways we try to help ourselves. Cognitive behavioral therapy is not a natural sounding treatment, but for me, it capitalizes just on this same sort of straightforward approach. So the first part to CBT is to help us examine what a person is thinking about when they're feeling especially depressed. So these thoughts, there are certain kinds of thoughts that go along with feeling depressed and down, and often the thoughts are not altogether true. There might be a grain of truth to them, but there are particular kinds of thoughts that are often present, and they fall in this kind of three corners of a circle, sort of three ways. One is, I'm no good. Another is, my life is no good. And a third might be, my future is no good. We call that the cognitive or thinking triangle or triad of depression. I'm no good, my situation is no good, and my future is no good. So we get a lot of thoughts. When we ask people, what are you thinking about when you're feeling depressed? They say things like, I'm a loser, I'm no good, I've never amounted to anything, I can't connect with other people. Or they say things like, my life is terrible, I'm all alone, nobody treats me well. Or they say things like, well, the future is so bleak and nothing is ever going to work out for me. Those are the kinds of thoughts that when we're doing cognitive therapy, we have an ear for. We're thinking about, are there some styles of thinking that a person has when they're feeling especially low? And our job as a cognitive therapist is to help them think more accurately or truthfully. This is not a therapy where the cognitive part, we try to tell people everything's great and they don't know it. Like, oh, my life is perfect and everyone likes me and it'll all work out for the best. It's really not about that. It's about helping people to pay attention to what they're thinking about when they're feeling low and down and to sort of examine whether the thoughts are true. We become a detective, actually. It's sort of the participant, the client, and you as the helper become a detective team to try to figure out whether some of their thoughts that are really present when they're feeling down, whether they're really true or not. So perhaps one of the people you're working with might have a thought like, I'm a burden to everyone. And we would try to identify that thought and say, hey, it sounds like this thought that you're a burden to everyone is really common when you're feeling depressed. Could we work on that a bit and see whether it's really altogether true or whether the truth is a little different? Could we talk about that? A cognitive therapist would begin that conversation. Cognitive therapy involves trying to find some exceptions to that thought. What are some things, well, sort of at first, why do you think that way? Why do you think that your life's altogether terrible? Or why do you think that you're not a good person? Why do you think that you're a burden to others? And usually we get a few examples, like for the burden, it might be I have to help someone has to help me with my checkbook, or I'm always needing help, financial help from a friend, or oh, I have trouble fixing things around the house. And those are examples of how a person might be a bit burdensome to others. But then we'd be looking for other things that are sort of on the other side. And that is, we might come to find out that they lend a hand to someone who they care about. And is that burdensome or helpful? Or maybe they give their sister a call and they try to offer some support for the hard times that she might be going through. Is that a burden to her, or is that actually a help? And we try to help them to figure out, hey, is this thought that I'm a burden altogether true? And then we help them to think to themselves, oh, I guess what the truth is that I do rely on people for financial support, and I'd like to work on that. But on the other hand, I'm helpful to my sister. I give her a call. I'm helpful to my neighbor. And I can be helpful in many ways at work. So it's not altogether true that I'm a complete burden. That's how a cognitive therapist works. to try to pay attention to what are the common thoughts that are in a person's mind when they're feeling depressed and sad and hopeless. If we find a list or get a sense of what the common thoughts are, usually we'll find that they're not altogether true. And then our job is to use several strategies, many of which you'll learn, to try to help them to think more truthfully and accurately. It's not a therapy of positive thinking in a way. It's really a therapy about accurate thinking. What's the truth here? That's usually good enough. There are particular kinds of thoughts that are really common in depression. We've talked about those, some of them already, like I'm no good and the future's no good and my circumstances are no good. But they come out in different categories. So sometimes they come out as labeling, like I'm a loser. That's a very common one, or I'm no good. That's a very common thought in depression. Sometimes they work out like predictions, like I could go to Thanksgiving with my family, but it'll be a disaster. Or I guess I could go to the movies, but it'll be a waste of time. I could go for a walk, but it'll just be too hard. That's how depression operates. Those are the kinds of thoughts. We call those fortune telling or predicting the future in a negative way. Another common kind of thought problem or inaccurate thinking that happens in depression is what we call all or nothing thinking. It's like maybe you go to an event and some things went okay, some things didn't go so well. Maybe you went to church or maybe you went to a get-together and you think, in reality, a person might have experienced a mix of good and not so good things. But when they're feeling depressed, they often overgeneralize. They make it all bad by saying, oh, that party was a disaster, or what a waste of time to go to work. I accomplished nothing today. And we help them to think, well, what did you really accomplish? So all or nothing thinking is really important. Fortune telling, negative fortune telling in the future. Labeling is another one. And there are many more that you'll learn about in this program. So as a helper in our research project, working with people in an attempt to help them to think more clearly, we'll give you several strategies to help. That's the cognitive or the thinking part of cognitive behavior therapy. A second very important element of CBT or cognitive behavior therapy is the behavior change part. When people are experiencing depression, they often, they spend a lot of time laying or sitting around. When you think of how they lived their day before the depression came and how they're living their day now, they're often much different. So, as we talked about before, many times when people are depressed, they begin to reduce their engagement in activities that they once did. They kind of cut back on things that they once did for enjoyment and satisfaction, like exercise, taking a walk, calling a friend, going somewhere to eat, reading a book, painting, watching television, whatever it might be. The things they get for satisfaction, they do for satisfaction, they often begin to drop away from them, to cut back on them. And that can be demoralizing. Also, another big part of the behavior therapy or the behaviors that go along with the depression that we've talked about is that people stop doing things that are necessary. Those accomplishments, those tasks that we do every day, like paying bills or keeping the house or getting ready for the day, taking a shower, putting on a new set of clothes, doing something in the yard. Those chores and tasks and everyday living activities, those things often get set aside as well. So often things begin to pile up. Putting off duties at work and you end up with a whole stack of them to do. Putting off duties in the home, then it becomes overwhelming. Not doing things for enjoyment, satisfaction, things you like to do, it gets demoralizing. So part of behavior therapy is to try to help people to set aside their predictions that they don't have enough energy or that things won't work out, and to go forward anyway, to try to re-engage with those things that they used to do for satisfaction and enjoyment, even if they feel like they don't have the energy for it, even if they feel like it won't work out, to take the walk anyway and test it out. Were they really right that it was going to be a complete waste of time? To make the call to a friend that they haven't talked to in a while, maybe return that call that they put off, and see whether in fact their predictions are true. We like to get people to be more active in several different ways. Sometimes we get them to be more active interpersonally, try to encourage them to engage with other people that they've been stepping away from, family and friends. That can often be really helpful. Sometimes the activities that we emphasize are exercise, things like walking, or sometimes even more vigorous exercise. It sort of depends on the situation. Another thing, of course, are those enjoyable activities and pastimes. And of course, another important element is to get some things done that you've been putting off. When we do cognitive behavior therapy well, we do both sides of it, the cognitive therapy and this name that we have for the doing part, behavioral activation. That's the fancy name that we have for doing things differently. So we work on the thinking and the behavior separately, but it works best when we work on them together. So if I have this thought, my life is miserable, and I've been avoiding things that I used to do for satisfaction, I could find some evidence. I could work with myself or work with someone who's helping me to sort of see that it's not true that everything is miserable and nothing is working out. At the same time, I could maybe try to do some things for enjoyment. So maybe I might be able to say, oh, I have this thought that my life is completely bleak, but I do know that when I see my grandchild, that's enjoyable to me. I still like talking to my neighbor, but there are other things that aren't as good as they used to be. But I did force myself to do some walking, and that seemed to make a difference, and it worked out better than I thought. And this combination of working on your thinking, working on improving how you live, and doing those two things together are really where the main action is, the thing that really works in cognitive behavioral therapy. Of course, all this is easier said than done. It takes persistence and effort and encouragement to give the kind of day-to-day practice that often is required for the cognitive behavioral therapy to be useful for people who are experiencing depression, either severe depression, moderate depression, or mild depression. CBT can be a useful skill. CBT can be partnered with other therapies too. So it isn't like, oh, you either have to take medicine or you have to take cognitive behavioral therapy. People can do those together. There are other treatments for depression that are very compatible with cognitive behavior therapy. So CBT is useful for many. It's helpful in approximately 3 in 4 people who participate in CBT get what we call clinically significant improvement. And that means improvement that matters to a person, that you can really, that's enough so it makes your life better. There are some people who don't respond as well, and we don't have full understanding about why that might be the case. It's kind of hard to know for sure, but it is a useful treatment. For many people, CBT is helpful, but they still need other treatment. So that's where combined treatment together, especially for people who have experienced depression for quite some time or have had a lot of depression episodes, sometimes combined treatment is the best. Medicine and a psychotherapy like cognitive behavioral treatment. Using those together can be often the right combination for people who have been struggling for a while.